Thanks for coming in, Rhian.
Pleasure.
You're the first one who's actually come into the office. So this is Academy Sessions, as you know. We invite people from the blockchain ecosystem, and we're trying to get, for our students and for the wider community, discussion going on where things are going, what do we need to focus on, what do we need to work on, and of course we want to hear about what you're working on and what you're all about. So maybe you can give me a quick introduction. How did you get into blockchain and what you've been working on so far?
Okay, well, I've been involved in blockchain more from a cryptocurrency point of view for between 3 to 4 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I started out just being massively interested in the kind of financial use cases and so on, and I started trading cryptocurrencies back in 2013, 2012, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
But my first real involvement started when, for my own use really, when I was trading, I obviously had a lot of different cryptos in different wallets, on exchanges, whatever. I found it really difficult to keep track of what I had, so I decided to write a little web application that I could use to that would just make calls to the APIs of all the exchanges and just give me my balance at any given time. So anyway, I ended up working with a friend on that. We launched that, which is a web app called Count My Crypto, which has been live for nearly 3 years now. So that's kind of more of a community effort than a profit-making kind of thing. But it kind of cemented my involvement in the whole kind of ecosystem. I just became obsessed with the idea of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and then when people started talking about other use cases, I think because I'm a technologist, I just got massively into it. Obviously, it's a fact that doesn't go unnoticed. There aren't that many women involved. There are more women involved than there used to be, but not loads and loads. So I kind of got involved with various kind of groups of women working with blockchain. With a friend, I launched London Women in Bitcoin, which is a meetup group. And then over the last couple of years, I've been working with my co-founders in Berlin on various projects, and that's kind of gone through various stages of launching open source Bitcoin payment API, and we've now been working on blockchain proof of ownership. We have a startup called Mamoru, which we're actively working on proofs of concept at the moment. We're early stage startup.
So it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about Mamoru. So what is it that you're using? What technology stack are you using, if you don't mind saying?
Okay.
Some of the details and maybe some of the learnings from that. So what's the most difficult part of getting this off the ground?
I think the most difficult thing is first of all evangelizing, explaining to people what it is. There's a kind of from a business point of view, there's this kind of perception that there's a lot of VC money floating around just waiting for blockchain projects. That's not actually the case.
No.
So, and obviously, I think the business side of it is probably the most challenging because we're 3 technical co-founders. So we'd much rather be spending time on the product than going out handling the business side of it. We're making good progress. In terms of technology, we're using Ethereum at the moment, and it's basically a Node API, Solidity contracts, and various lightweight clients on top of that. We're kind of building a platform. So our first use case is actually a native Android app for bicycle registration and proof of ownership, because such a thing is generally lacking in the world, and being victims of having bicycles stolen in Berlin, it kind of gave us this idea. But in reality, Mamoru is a platform that could be used for not just registering ownership, resale, but things like maintenance events. So for example, if you're buying a bicycle and you want to know how well it's been maintained, theoretically the manufacturer or reseller, if it's a decent bike that has a maintenance program, the app obviously off blockchain can receive push notifications to let people know when maintenance is due, this kind of thing. Then on blockchain could be stored various events. I mean, we're using bicycles as an example because it's something that most people have, and it's kind of familiar, and if you talk about bicycle ownership, people can kind of get their heads around it, but really the concept could be applied to anything. So it's not really proof of authenticity in the same way that provenance or chronicled are doing. It's kind of, it is proof of life cycle stuff, but it's a whole convergence of things. It's proof of possession, proof of maintenance events, and also provides, there's a sort of social networking angle because it enables people to report their bicycle's been stolen. We're looking at various kind of tag technology. We're going to market with NFC, and that's what we've been trialing.
That's the thing that I was going to ask about, because obviously one of the big problems is how do you bring data onto the blockchain, and then how do you correlate things on a blockchain network with real world objects, events, and so on.
Okay, so this thing of the intersection of real world and blockchain is one of the challenging things. So as everybody working on projects like this knows, so NFC is not a perfect solution for various reasons. We can, our proof of concept involves embedding an NFC chip into the body of the bicycle, but in such a way that the bike frame doesn't act as a Faraday cage and kind of block it from being scanned. But obviously we're looking at other stuff like BLE, and but the whole point is that IoT in terms of kind of like tagging technology is something that's kind of moving on. So the idea is that if you go to market with something that other people are improving, you know, we've had a look at the secure NFC technology that Chronicled are using. Again, that's not perfect, but one day there will be something that's perfect. So it's it's like a two-way approach. Obviously, bike frames have numbers, so our app prototype has a field where you can enter the bike frame. So the bike frame is essentially part of the contract. The bike frame number, and also the chips are pre-registered. So then when you have your contract, you have the chip, you have the frame number, you have whatever elements of your own identity you want to be registered. I think it's probably quite important to say that we're not doing proof of identity for people. There are so many people specialising in this, so many people chucking large amounts of resources at that. Like, I mean, the Deloitte one's like the obvious one, but so many people are doing blockchain proof of identity for people. The idea is you could then use a third-party identity proof if you wanted to associate your bicycle with you in such a way. Obviously, when it comes to possessions, tags, surveillance, lots of people might not want to do that. So it's your choice what level of identity you associate with your possessions that you've registered.
So what I'm interested in is that there are obviously not that many companies that are actually building something around blockchain, that are using smart contracts, that are using Ethereum. There are a couple, there are a few, but obviously not that many. So since it's such a new technology, there are not that many best practices for developers, for deployment, all of that. So since you're all technical, I'm quite curious to hear how you approach that, what you've kind of built up in terms of best practices internally, and what the biggest learnings are there.
Okay, I think the biggest learnings are that when you're starting out, you tend to be in prototype mode. And I think that is possibly quite a bad thing, because you want to be as lean as possible, you want to be quick to market, but then if you don't have the infrastructure in place, you pay for it over time.
Yeah, you're kicking it down the road.
And I think this is a kind of generic problem for lots and lots of companies starting up, because there's huge excitement around this. Also, the fact that you're building effectively on shifting sand, that's another thing.
Yes, of course.
So
yes.
a lot of people are really, it's like there's a mental block about wanting to commit to a certain way of working when you don't know what is going to happen further down the line. So we're aiming to do proper CI. We're not there yet, but and obviously we have different environments and so on. I think one of the important things that we're doing is I write test code for a living in my day job, so we make sure that we get the testing right.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that people, again, often tend to neglect, because the thing is, the technology is really cool, it's really exciting. The temptation is there to just sort of plough ahead. You want to get something that works as quickly as possible, but then you have to do things right. We have tests at different layers, but I think what we're finding a challenge is actually working with the Ethereum production environment. Just the same sort of problems everybody has with sort of slowness.
Yes. So in terms of you're mentioning different layers in testing. Since this is a fairly technical audience, I'd love to hear what kind of testing layers are you operating on, and are you using a framework? Are you using Truffle or anything else?
No, we're not using Truffle. I really like Truffle, but I'm not actually doing the dev on our project. I'm kind of doing delivery management and tests, so I'm kind of overseeing what's there.
Yes.
And my co-founder, who is writing most of the code, just decided to go down the route of not using the framework. So what we have is fair amount of, we're light on contract test code at the moment. That probably will change, but we are, without giving away too much about what we're doing, we are not possibly wedded to the idea of using Ethereum or only Ethereum long term. We're looking at different options. So while obviously building up the test layer is really important, we are not kind of over-committing to using Solidity specific frameworks.
And I guess it's also early days, so
and it's also early days. In terms of testing at the top layers for our Android app, I'm using Espresso, which is like really nice native framework. But obviously one massive problem that I've run into is emulating the NFC scanning.
Of course, yeah.
So
it's a tricky
obviously we're having to sort of work around things like doing registration by direct API calls for the testing, because like at the sort of very top layer of testing, like at the client level, you I'd be interested to know, actually, if anyone wants to put comments on this and they found a really good way to emulate scanning in Android tests, please comment. Let me know.
Please add in the comments if you have any thoughts on NFC emulation in Android testing. I'm curious how you found the building mobile application, Android application that interacts with Ethereum blockchain.
So we just have, so we've got an API. So
so it's a remote node that is accessed. Okay, so
Yeah.
you've not tried any of the like client stuff on Android or anything like that. Okay, well if you do, I'd be curious to hear how that's like, because that's something we haven't done yet, but we are very, very interested in doing very soon.
Yeah, I've been reading up about it, but then the other thing that I was talking to one of the very few blockchain UX-y type people the other day, and she made a really good point generally about native apps, that possibly long term they might not be the way to go. They're great for betas because you can package them, get them out to people and version control them a lot more easily, but it's possible that longer term a responsive web application is a much more sensible way to go. And then obviously, things like direct blockchain integration become much easier because you can use tried and tested frameworks.
Yeah, and of course you can use client-side signing and that kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's something that we would look at longer term, but in terms of actually pushing an APK out for people to do beta testing, actually having a native app's really handy.
Absolutely, yeah. So from an overall product development perspective, what are the things that you think we need to build as a community over the next, say, 3 years for this to become feasible, right? For blockchain products, digital products to become feasible?
Well, two of my preoccupations are testing and UX. I think we need two different things. We need great training, which obviously you guys are providing. I've been a beneficiary of one of your developer course, and it's really, really, really good. So we need training, and we don't just need developer training. We need people thinking in terms of usability, people thinking in terms of product owner and product manager type of stuff, because at the moment, a lot of the apps that we're seeing, a lot of the client applications are really geared towards enthusiasts and people who already understand blockchain, and they're perhaps not so transparent and not so usable for people who are approaching them like they'd approach a non-blockchain app. It's hard to describe. I mean, ideally, if you're talking about mainstream applications, perhaps it's not the point to, you can educate people about the importance of why cryptography is important, why private keys are important, but to a certain extent, just like people don't necessarily know the stack underneath any app they're using, perhaps the UI should be more neutral and more focused on usability. I think we're reaching that point of maturity now where it's moved beyond an enthusiast's audience, and things are being pushed out to the general public. So usability is a massive thing. Testing, yes. I think we need training and tools.
Yeah.
And there are some people doing amazing things, like I really enjoyed your interview last time with Tim Coulter.
With Tim Coulter, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously I've used Truffle, I think it's great, and there are people doing really, really fantastic, giving up their own time to maintain fantastic open source, but we need more people doing that.
And we need some more money as well, I feel. People and organizations are going to have to spend more time and money on building these tools, because otherwise we won't really get anywhere. I mean, it's still very, very basic, everything, and it's amazing. I mean, Truffle is amazing, and there is Embark is still going along as well. They're doing stuff, and then there's TestRPC and so on. But I think if you look at what's available for, say, Java, or for specifically for Android applications, that's a whole toolkit that, out of the box, you're starting with 10,000s of hours of developer time there ready for you to build on top of.
Yes.
So that's
And where's that resource going to come from? And part of my concern is that some of it might derive, some of the money might be derived from large companies who then turn that into a bit of a walled garden and sell a proprietary product. You can understand why they would do that, but at the same time, it's a barrier to entry for people who want to get involved.
Yes.
I think there's so much exciting and interesting stuff. It would just be great if everybody using these things contributed instead of complaining about things. I think it's a general open source kind of thing. I was just listening to some of the talks. There are testers listening who were watching talks from Selenium Conf, and it was a constant coming out of that it's an open source project, yet all the people who are maintaining this amazing tool, which just about every tester uses, all they get is people complaining at them, basically. This doesn't work.
That's all they see. Of course.
Support me, support me. So I think people have to be really motivated to give their own time and provide these frameworks. I think also there needs to be an acknowledgement of specialism and lack of specialism. There are, I'd be the first to admit, I'm a very lightweight when it comes to development. I can develop web applications. I'm not a security specialist. I'm not a cryptographer. And I think there's a certain sometimes I think there's a bit of denial in the community about what people's capabilities actually are. So you get people who have maybe built apps, are good kind of like mid-weight developers, taking on projects that involve security and cryptography that they don't necessarily understand. It's not actually their fault because there is not a lot of human resource in that area, but it's a few missteps here can be actually bad for the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, and expensive as well. I mean, we are talking about code that can hold funds. So, this is some serious stuff.
Yes, and when you have people, I mean, I know this is controversial. I don't want to sort of like flame individual people, but I was at a meetup recently. There was a panel discussion about DAO, and one of the reasons brought up, I'm not kind of naming individuals, but one of the reasons was, well, we didn't expect people to invest that much money in it.
Yes.
Which you can understand, but at the same time, it's not really the right response.
No, and if it's an uncapped kind of situation, or the cap is very high, as we also seen, then it's certainly an option. And if it involves a lot of money, in response, it has to be the right kind of approach. I mean, if you build a web application that, if it gets breached, you lose a few email addresses, that's a different kind of level of security and also software engineering skills involved than if it is something that holds millions of dollars. Exactly. I think it's that kind of, I think, Zero said it on Twitter that it's much closer to building nuclear reactor code than it is to building just a regular app.
Yeah.
So I think that's still a mindset thing, because it's quite simple. You can apply a contract, you can build a DApp. It's not that hard, but there's definitely a whole spectrum of what it would involve.
Yes, I mean, ultimately, I don't want to knock people too much, because they are people doing great,
they're trying
open source stuff. They're doing stuff, and ultimately the whole affair, however you agree with the way it was handled, it focused people on security. It got the conversation going. I mean, it's obviously people would prefer it hadn't happened. I actually have friends who lost money, and I wasn't actually invested myself beyond like a few euros worth, but I could see how people got burned. But I think ultimately maybe it's a good thing, because it focuses people on, it's exposed weaknesses, it's brought everything out into the sunlight, and
maybe also kind of a little bit pop that idealistic we can just put it on the blockchain and it's going to be this crypto utopia dream thing.
Yes.
So it's a lot harder. The real world is probably a lot more difficult than that.
The real world is a lot more difficult, and of course, a big thing is managing people's expectations, and the whole thing of the Gartner hype cycle and blockchain at the moment being somewhere near the peak of inflated expectations or whatever it is.
Yes.
Maybe it's just starting to come off the peak, but people who don't really understand at all how it works are trying to sell it into management as wildly inappropriate things. So I think that's a really important thing, just being realistic about the things that it is an amazing technology for, and not kind of wasting time suggesting really poor uses for it.
And for the sake of the whole community as well, of the whole ecosystem.
Yes, yeah.
So I would like to, I'm curious to hear what you think in terms of where this is going. So, let's think a bit into long-term future, and I would like you to think about two different scenarios. So one is, if everything stays the way that it is now, how will it turn out in your mind, and how would you like it to turn out, and what would have to change today for that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. So if things carry on the way they are, and this isn't meant to imply that I think the space needs governance or anything like that. Things have to happen organically. Mm-hmm. I would really like to see more people getting involved in the deeper technologies behind it. More people who are mathematicians or from a mathematical background becoming involved. I would like to see a recognition by a lot of the corporates who are currently developing their own walled gardens, that actually there is very little to beat the security of a widely distributed public network. I would like to see a movement back from corporates towards a recognition that the public blockchains have a lot to offer, and maybe some kind of funding from organisations who are benefiting from using these in that way. And I would like more people from a range of different technology, with a range of different expertises to get involved. So I think it's at both ends of the spectrum. You have a lot of people in the middle who are good application developers, and a smaller number of people who are really, really good blockchain developers.
Yes.
I would like to see more blockchain specialists, fewer people kind of like me tinkering about at the application level. Well, not fewer, but proportionately fewer. The real necessity is for more people to get involved at that kind of deeper level, plus a lot more people coming in on the product side and the UX side who understand the technology and can start thinking about great use cases and great applications, and making things that people kind of find recognizable and find easy to use. I think we still have a lot of people coming in at the kind of product owner and project management level who don't understand the technology and are trying to, there's just a mismatch of expertises, I think. You need more people involved, more tools and more funding. Where all that comes from, I don't know. I'm certainly against kind of centralised initiatives, but those are the things we need. How they happen, I think, is less relevant. So I think if we stumble on as we are, we're going to be in more or less the same position in a couple of years' time. Lots more failed startups that don't really get off the ground. Lots of VCs kind of complaining about where did my money go. A few more episodes like the DAO, and still a hardcore of people using Bitcoin, which is, I mean, I think Bitcoin's amazing. I come from a, very, very Bitcoiny background, and I certainly don't think Bitcoin is kind of going anywhere. But if things don't kind of develop, we might not see the blockchains being used to their full potential, and that saddens me. I think in a kind of nice crypto utopia world, we'll see strengthening of the existing blockchains. I don't think I'm a Bitcoin enthusiast, I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist. I think it's really interesting to see people coming along with new ideas. I don't agree with necessarily all of them, but I think the more experimentation and interesting developments there are in the space, the better. I think there's a potential for a really bright future, but there's a lot of hard work in between, and I think we just shouldn't neglect the fundamentals of good development principles.
Yeah, makes sense. So with all of this, I always ask this: what are your concerns or worries with the technology as a whole, in terms of, both on a technical and maybe on a social, societal level?
Okay, so I think on a societal level, I have concerns that blockchain technology run in a centralized, or blockchain type technology, pseudo blockchain technology run in a centralized way by governments is pretty much a nightmare. Like I post every now and again on Medium, and I don't know if you remember the whole white paper for RS Coin, the Bank of England, the proposed hookup with the Bank of England. Actually, it's my old University College London. It's that they're always quite forward thinking about things like that. But I read the white paper and I was kind of horrified, because they were essentially talking about a system of a handful of nodes running on a very permissioned basis, with one kind of master node to control them, and obviously the possibility that they were working towards was the abolition of any kind of money other than a centralized currency, with obviously no anonymity. And I think if distributed ledger technology is used in this very centralized way by governments and large corporations, then that's a really bad thing.
Yeah.
I think it's not the right way to use the technology, but I can see that a lot of governments and a lot of large corporations are kind of... I'm absolutely not against private companies, even large monopolistic private companies, leveraging blockchain for efficiencies. People will or won't buy their products. At the end of the day, it's a market system. I've got no concerns about that. They can use what technology they want. But the minute there's the possibility of a lack of a voluntary nature for whether people participate in these things, that really would be my big concern about blockchain technology and how it's used.
Okay.
And also security breaches, things like a lot of people are talking about what happens when quantum computing becomes widespread, and obviously there's going to have to be a lot of development, a lot of new thinking in parallel to tackle these kind of challenges. It's a way off yet, but we're obviously moving in that direction.
Yeah. So finally, to wrap up, people coming out of our courses, people who've gone through the 9 weeks and who've kind of done their project and are done with all the material, we always try to point them to places they can go. What would your advice be to newly minted blockchain developers to learn more and also to get involved with the community?
I think you learn by doing. You learn better by doing in a structured environment, but there is nothing, so if you've been through the course and you've built the end of course project, go and build more projects. Build a small project every week. Talk to other people. interact on forums, take part in EtherCamp, hook up with other people to build stuff, do remote pairing with people, and read, because there are new frameworks and new tools coming out all the time. You don't find out about things if you don't read about them, basically. And there's a really active community. It's not always easy to find documentation, which is why a course like this is really good. The Ethereum Stack Exchange is always like a really good place to find answers. If you've got specific questions, or just to read questions that other people have asked. I can't really think of stuff that doesn't apply to general kind of development type things. Build stuff, ask questions, work with other people, see what other people are doing, be inspired by it, and don't be afraid to try new things.
Cool. Thank you very much, Rhian. If you want to read more about what Rhian was talking about here, follow the link to her Medium below, and also have a look at our courses at B9lab Academy.
Thanks.
If you want to learn more about blockchain, check out our online courses at B9lab Academy, and also subscribe to this channel.